Okay, let us begin. First of all, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another PUA webinar. It is a privilege and an honor to be here together with Rachel Tuchman, a licensed mental health counselor with a private practice in Cedarhurst, and someone who is well known in the world of mental health, especially when it comes to the topics of infertility, reproductive health, pregnancy loss, etc. And with Pesach approaching, and unfortunately, as we know how common it is for people to struggle with infertility, Pesach can be one of the hardest times of the year where families come together. The yontif of Pesach is all about v'higadeta lebincha, teach your children, the chinuch experience. How many times have we heard about the concept of or the Yom Tif of Pesach being one where we can transmit the Mesorah, Emunah, everything to our children, our children, our children. And then there's the couple that's struggling to have a child. There's the family that's looking to have that opportunity where there can be a V'higadeta lebincha experience, and it's not happening, and they're expected to show up to the Seder, to smile, to be part of the family, to hug the nieces and nephews. Can you give us a little bit of direction, give us a little bit of a background behind this extremely difficult topic, this extremely difficult experience and situation where couples are faced with having to show up and present at the Yontif table and put on their best and their smile when really they're hurting and there's so much pain inside?
I think that this is something that when we live in communities and even when we practice a religion that is so much centered on family, this is one of the challenges of someone who is either infertile because it's infertility by circumstance, meaning they're single and so they don't have children, or infertility because they're struggling as a couple. And I think this is something like that as a community, we definitely need to work on. And I want to acknowledge that for all the people who are struggling, that this is a conversation that mental health professionals, I know rabbinical and religious leaders are constantly having. How do we include people more? How are we more sensitive to them? I think we've come a very long way in understanding that we do need to create more spaces and have more sensitive conversations around this. Awareness Shabbases, we have these in shuls, that organizations, Yesh Tikva has like an awareness Shabbos where they speak between Purim and Pesach specifically about the challenges of infertility between those times, which again, Purim is very child-centered,
Right.
dressing of your kids and shalach manot and the Pesach, the entire mitzvah of Pesach, right? Like you said, is like teaching your children. And when you're at that Seder table and hoping every year, this year I thought I would have the baby at the table, sitting with me at the table. This year I thought I would be pregnant, that we would be expecting our baby, or my baby was due around this time. It's really, really difficult. And I think that it's okay for you, if you're struggling, it's okay for you to feel like your community needs to do better, your families need to do better, your leaders need to do better. You don't have to carry the burden yourself. And I think sometimes that is something that people feel like a resentment of, like, I'm alone and nobody cares about me. And I think it's amazing that we have webinars like this and organizations like PUA that are saying, we want people to know that there is this issue of infertility, that there are couples and people who struggle, and we need to just heighten our awareness of how we speak and even the traditions that we have. If you know that you're going to have someone at your Seder table, your daughter, your sister, your cousin, and you normally have a lot of traditions that are like, okay, all the kids do this and that, and this year's a really hard year for your sibling or your cousin or whoever, maybe consider like changing your traditions this year to just be more mindful of not causing pain to that person in your family or your friend. Um, so I think it's like important for us to remember to validate, like for you, the person that's experiencing infertility, that these times are challenging. There's nothing wrong with you if you're feeling upset or sad or resentful or angry or lonely. And for anyone who's in the position of being a supportive friend or family member, it is on you, on us, the people who are not in that place anymore, or not in that place at all. And I say anymore because I always say when I have these conversations, I always come to it from I was someone who went through infertility, and that's how I speak on this subject first, as the person who experienced it versus like the clinical perspective. I always remember what it was like for me as a person going through it, and like what I wanted and what I needed. So even if you're not in that place anymore, it's really our responsibility to try to think, how to do better. It shouldn't be the people who are suffering alone, that they need to come up with solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would you say that, if we could zoom out of the Pesach Purim, that perspective for right now, because really it's true that we're having this conversation Purim Pesach time, and a lot of these issues are coming up because of Pesach. But what do you find in your work, whether it's your own personal experience or client base? What do you think, like, the major emotional challenges that different couples face, and how would you recommend couples navigate that? And I kind of, it's a difficult question, it's a complicated question, but I also want you to address it from the female perspective and the male perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So fertility, we know, is an emotional roller coaster. The most common challenges that I find are anxiety and stress. There's so much uncertainty about, is this cycle going to work? The procedure that I'm doing, I have to time the cycle. I have to go to the doctor. I have to be there at 6 a.m. and then I have to get back to be at my office at 7:30. And it's so stressful. I'm waiting for test results. I'm waiting to find out if the cycle worked. Repeated setbacks. There's a lot of anxiety and stress. There's a lot of grief and loss. And I think sometimes people don't think about what they're experiencing in the treatment of fertility as sometimes grief or loss, because they say, well, if I didn't have a miscarriage, how am I grieving? What loss is there?
Mm-hmm.
It's more obvious if you did have a miscarriage or you had that kind of loss, but actually unsuccessful cycles, just not having any kind of pregnancy, can feel like a loss. The loss of that dream of being able to conceive like everybody else, right? Not having to pay to have a child. There's that loss of like a vision of how you thought you building your family would look. And just in terms of if you thought about age gaps or kids being closer or separate or having or not having, there is that loss of a dream and of a vision and of a vision and the family planning that maybe you thought that you would be able to have. So grief and loss is a big piece of it too. There's a lot of guilt and shame. That's a big one too. The feelings of inadequacy. A lot of people, and that's why this struggle stays private. I don't want people to think there's something wrong with me. We internalize that because our bodies are failing us or whatever it is, that it's like a stain on who we are as humans. We blame ourselves for fertility issues, even when it's unexplained or there is like a medical cause that you could not have done anything about. We blame ourselves. And I think community expectations about family like makes it worse, and again, that's not the community's fault. It's just we live in family centered communities, and it's like a double-edged sword. Like it's so beautiful, and then at the same time, if you're someone who can't build a family, it's a struggle for you. It can really make it worse. And the holidays definitely are times where that it feels like there's like this magnifying glass on your pain, and that's really hard. Isolation is a big one. So many people that go through infertility feel like they are alone. Nobody understands. And again, often because it's private and they're not talking about it, they can also feel disconnected from people who don't get it. So if someone's like, oh, but I know someone who adopted and then she had a baby. So, and you're like, what are you talking about? You don't get what I'm going through. And seeing others who, are having families with seemingly no problem, that can make you feel very lonely too. The obvious one is relationship strain. And this is definitely, I see this probably the most, couples fighting because he's not upset and I'm upset, or she's so upset and she thinks that I don't care, or he's so upset and I'm trying to figure out like what's the next thing that we're doing, and couples just not on the same page about what the experience is like, what they want to do in terms of treatment, processing, the whole experience differently. There's definitely the strain on just your lives in general, about your intimacy, physically, emotionally, spiritually. You might really just like ends up feeling like you're on two totally different planets when really your goal is ultimately the same, but you end up feeling so distant from each other. That's very, very common. And the last one I would say is like there's hope and despair. You're constantly swinging between these two, optimism for a new cycle, and then devastation when it doesn't work. And it's exhausting. And I find a lot of people feel that that constant, like riding that wave and crashing, is so hard. So that's really the most common challenges. There are plenty of others, but that's the most common that I see. And some tips for that
Yeah.
would be to acknowledge the feelings. That's the first thing. We always say in therapy, we say name it to tame it, right? All of your feelings make sense. So without judgment, you just, I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling devastated. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling like it's not fair. I'm feeling jealous. It takes some of the power away when you name it. And I saw a quote the other day that I loved, and that I think it's like, I keep saying it all the time now, is like, feelings are like children. You don't want them driving the car, but you shouldn't stuff them in the trunk either, right? So we acknowledge the feelings. We don't let them take control. We don't say, oh, I'm so jealous, so now I'm going to act on that jealousy. We don't say, I'm so angry, and now I'm going to live in the anger. But we just acknowledge it. Here's anger. It's here, and it makes sense. Here's sadness. It's here, and it makes sense. I don't have to sit in my bed and cry now for days, or scream at people, or wish bad on people. But I'm going to name that feeling and notice that's how I'm feeling. I think building a support network is really important. Talk to a therapist, join a support group, join things like these webinars like PUA offers, and all of the resources that they offer. If you have a trusted friend or a family member who you know you could confide in, talk to them. Hearing other people's stories kind of normalizes the struggle. So a podcast, a blog, a social media page of someone that you know who's going through or has gone through, that really helps you feel like you're not alone. Practicing boundaries is a big one. I know boundaries is like a cool, like trendy word nowadays. But when I say boundaries, I mean just deciding what you feel comfortable. Like, how are you going to behave? What do I feel comfortable sharing with people? And what can I do to limit anything that is going to activate me, make me upset, make me uncomfortable, put me in a bad position where I feel like I have to answer questions I don't want to, or be upset about something when I don't want to be. Focus on what you can control. This is the big one. Your daily routine, right? What time you go to bed, what you eat for breakfast, what social media you're on, right? Like, who are you, what habits, social media habits do you have? Like, are they good? Maybe you should unfollow some pages, spend less time online and go outside and get some fresh air. Who you connect to, that's really like a very important thing to focus on. There's so much that you can't control in the world of infertility. Focus on what you can control. You know, that I make time every day to like daven. I make time every day to call my sister who makes me, like laugh and makes me forget things. And also consider professional help, which we'll get into a little bit more, I think, later. If it's too much, like, it's okay to reach out to someone and talk to someone and get that support. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It means that infertility is really, really hard, and it's not easy to do it alone. And it's not about eliminating, like getting rid of the pain. I know a lot of people are saying like, oh, I just don't want to feel bad anymore. And I think that's not realistic. It's really just about learning how to carry it without breaking.
You mentioned that sense of loneliness. There's someone from the group here put a question onto the chat, and I encourage everyone, if you'd like to submit any questions, please feel free. And someone submitted a question, if you could speak about the experience of being single and going through the egg freezing process. You have a couple with infertility, they're going through it, and perhaps you could argue, at least she has him and he has her, and they can do it together. Can you speak a little bit for, the single woman who is not yet married? She's looking for her shidduch. She's either contemplating egg freezing, she's done it, she's in the middle of it. It's such a confusing and a difficult decision, and there's so much around it, and the world just doesn't realize what she's going through, and she just feels so alone. Can you speak to such a person, and how should they cope with that guilt or that shame, that sense of isolation that comes along with fertility preservation, being single?
Yeah. So I know that a lot of the time when I've dealt with young women who are thinking about doing egg freezing, or when I deal with women who are doing egg freezing, I know so much of the time, a lot of the hesitancy is like, I feel like I'm giving up on finding someone if I'm doing this. And I always say, I feel like egg freezing is like life insurance. It is the responsible thing to do. So just like you get life insurance, not because you're planning on dying, but because you want to make sure that in the event that something happens, the people that you love and care about are taken care of. It's just responsible. egg freezing is the same thing. I'm just being responsible, not because I don't think I'm going to find anyone or I'm deciding I'm, going to be a cat lady till I'm 90. I'm saying that even when I find someone, I want to make sure that if there is a struggle, I already have like a backup plan so that like I have my eggs frozen and we have options so that we don't ever feel stuck and I'm not ever in a position where I'm putting my relationship or where my relationship is in any kind of trouble that it doesn't have to be. So I think number one perspective of egg freezing of like this is why I'm doing it and it's the responsible thing to do. I think that number one takes away a lot of the shame and a lot of the um, stigma behind it. And I think that's part of why people feel like it's hard to talk about, that they're doing it because they feel like people are going to think that I'm giving up or that I think I'm never going to get
Right.
married.
So
No,
weak, yeah.
yeah. No, I'm just being responsible, and I know that some people have had parents that have reactions like, why are you freezing your eggs? They freak out. You're just letting yourself think that you're going to be single. No, I'm just, like I said, this is a life insurance policy. It's just the responsible thing to do. We hope that we never have to cash in on it, but it's just the right thing to do. So I think having that perspective of I'm just being responsible and I'm taking care of my future, I think that helps to be able to open you up to telling either another single friend of yours or a sister or a friend, hey, I'm doing this. And then I think that as friends of someone who's doing that, we can say, do you want me to drive with you to the appointment? You want to let me take you home from the appointment? Let me check in with you, let me bring you something after, you drop off a coffee, bring them lunch, whatever it is. I think that that's important. And something I do want to point out also, though, is I know very often people who are single and are doing this egg freezing process think like, oh, it's easier when you're married to someone and you're going through it with them. And something we will talk about here now is it's actually not easier, because you can be married and feel completely alone in your fertility struggle because you are both handling it very differently, maybe even like in opposing ways. And that can make you feel even lonelier. And I think sometimes people think because you're married, that automatically means that it's not as hard for you or it's not as challenging. And sometimes it could be easier not to have to deal with another person's emotions around it. So I think like sometimes we look at other people's lives and we idealize, oh, she has it better or it's easier for him. And I think just remembering everybody has their challenges and in this journey, like nothing about it is simple. And I think just kind of keeping the focus on like, why am I doing this? And why is this important to me? I think that does help a little bit of the struggle and the self stigma that we kind of put on ourselves.
That is such a good point. Someone wrote in the comments here that being in the waiting room as a single is also so hard. Seeing all the couples there is a very challenging and emotionally draining. But it's such an important perspective that don't think that the couples, because they have each other, they're so much better than I am. And if only I was in their position. Of course, a single wants to be married, and a married couple wants to have children, and we always are looking to advance in life. But I think what you're saying is such an important perspective. Just focus on the you in the now, in whatever you are taking, whatever needs to be taken care of. Take care of yourself, take care of the situation. And Be'ezras Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring the husband into the picture. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring the child into the picture, whatever it is. But never to look over your shoulder and look at others and think about what they're doing and how much better they are than I am. It's such an important perspective. If I can
Yeah.
go back on something that you mentioned, but you said something which was really important. I'm not sure you mentioned it. I'm not sure you meant it, but you said it, especially, and it ties into the Pesach Yontif experience. How do we deal with parents that just don't get our situation? How do we deal with parents that don't understand the married situation? How come I don't have a grandchild? How do we deal with parents that don't understand egg freezing? Like, what are some tips? What are some ways to navigate, whether it's a parent, an uncle, a grandparent, that are so eager, and it's coming out of love, of course. They're not, of course, they
Yeah.
want what they want, what's best for us, but the way
Yeah.
that it comes across can sometimes be so obnoxious and so offensive. So, like, what are some of the tips to navigate that really sensitive situation?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that we all need to do is we need to like be mentally prepared, meaning there's no surprises when you're with your family. So if you go for Pesach and your mother is saying things, I don't think that or father or whoever or Bubby or someone is saying things. I don't know that anyone here is like shocked by the comments that those family members make. I think you're probably like, okay, like I knew this was coming. So I think being mentally prepared to understand, like, I know I'm probably going to have to deal with comments from family this year. It always happens. Or I know if I bring this up, I already know what my mother's going to say. I already know what my dad is going to say or what my sister is going to say. So I say, come prepared with like canned answers, right? Come prepared with like your exit strategy if you're going to do that. Come prepared with like how you're going to change the direction of the conversation. Be mentally prepared. So if you know your mother's going to say something, say, am I going to like entertain it? Am I going to like kind of pretend I didn't hear it? Or am I going to set a boundary with her and say, like, Mom, I really don't want to talk about this. It's Yansif and I just want to have a good time. And if we talk about this, I'm going to get stressed and upset and it's going to ruin everything. Let's just like take it off the table for Yancey, literally, you know, figuratively and literally. Like, let's just not talk about it. If you can kind of prepare yourself to know how you're going to respond, I think that also helps that when the question inevitably comes up or the comment inevitably comes, you're not like shocked that it came. You were expecting it because, again, you know, you're honest about who you're dealing with and what your family is and what they, you know, what their issues are and how they're going to react to things. So I think just like that mental preparedness is a really big part of just learning how to navigate all those like funny comments, challenges, whatever it is that will come up.
Yeah. And what about kind of zooming out, not just family, but what about friends, community support? Sometimes on Yontif, we see people we haven't seen since last Yontif. We haven't seen you.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you since Sukkot, or I haven't seen you since Pesach. And since Pesach, you know, nothing happened in my life in terms of getting married or having children. But you, who were in such, we were in such a similar situation last year, the year before. I see that, oh, you've had a baby and you're even pregnant now. How do you, how would you advise both the couple or the single who is struggling? And how would you guide the couple who is now pregnant and is seeing their friends this yontif, they're being reunited, and like she's still not pregnant, and you got married this past year, but you're about to see your friend who's still not married, and it's uncomfortable, it's awkward because thank God, Baruch Hashem, you had something, but they still don't, and they're still waiting, and you really don't want. It's obviously the elephant in the room, and you don't want it to affect the relationship, but like, how could it not? So,
Yeah.
can you speak from both perspectives?
Yeah. So I think if you are the friend or family member, number one, if you know that you're going to see your friend who you haven't seen and she doesn't know that you're expecting, maybe text her before. And again, don't call. I know people are like, yeah, but calling, texting is so impersonal. This is actually the one time where texting is the most appropriate and the only appropriate thing to do. So if you have a friend who you know is struggling to get pregnant and you are pregnant, you must text her and say, I'm so excited to see you, Yansif. I just want to give you the heads up. We're expecting. This way she can process, he can
Can
process
you go?
whoever.
Can you actually? I think this is so important. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you
Yeah.
actually give us like a text? Like, what, would you say, like, would you preface by saying, I know this is uncomfortable. I know I don't want this to come between, like, how would you formulate the text?
So I think it depends on your relationship with this person, how close you are with them. So again, if it's like someone you see once a year, you don't need to text them. But if it's like your good friend, you should say, "I want you to know because I don't want you to feel hurt." And if by the way you're letting them know before you let other friends, say, "I'm telling you before I tell anyone else because I want you to know first." And I haven't told anyone else yet. You know, we're expecting, and I just want to let you know. And I think leave it at that. You don't have to be like, because I know it's so hard for you and I know you're struggling and I know you guys have been trying for so long. You don't say any of that. Just say, I just want you to know we're expecting and that's it and leave it. And they don't have to reply to you. And like, you should have that in mind too. I'm not expecting a mazel tov or a b'shah tova or a, wow, that's so great. I'm telling them because I want them to have the space to process privately and because I want to give them that dignity of not seeing me for the first time and being like, oh my God, whoa. And then having to try to put on that face of, I'm not upset, I'm not sad, I'm not jealous, I'm not any of that. So I think that if you know that you're going to be seeing a family member or a friend, yes, text before, very simple, to the point. It doesn't have to be oh, and I'm davening for you. Like, don't do that. Unless you know that they would specifically appreciate the I'm davening for you. For some people, it feels very patronizing and condescending, and like you're treating them like a nebuch, like you're davening for me. I don't need you to. So just know, is this the kind of person that would appreciate me saying that? Or should I just keep it? I wanted you to know before I see you, we're expecting, and you know, and that's it. Um, and let them just do what they want with that. And again, I think texting is the most appropriate. And I know sometimes, like I said, like I know someone once made a phone call to someone I know that, and they said, like, I know you generally are supposed to text these things, but I really thought that was wrong. And this person was like, no, that is absolutely correct. You should be texting me. Like, I don't want this phone call. So please just remember, like, this is the one time where text is absolutely appropriate and actually a must. And less is always better. Less is always more, you know? So keeping it simple, not belaboring, not, Amir Tashem by you, and don't do that. Like they already feel so bad in Nebuch, and even if they're happy for you, there's still a lot of sadness too at that moment. So just give them space for that.
And how do you prepare for the uncomfortable like reunion? Like you see each other first day of Yontif at Kiddush, and it's like she hasn't responded. She certainly read it, but she didn't respond. It's like, how do you prepare yourself mentally and physically? Do you hug? Do you go over? Like obviously it depends on who, what the relationship is. But I mean, how would you recommend preparing for that really uncomfortable first time you see her?
Again, I think that like if you give this person that information just with the mindset of I'm just telling them because I don't want them to be hurt when they see me, meaning I don't want them to be hurt because that is the first time they're receiving the news. I think you've done your job. And then when you see them in person, just act normal. Obviously, don't pretend that you are not pregnant or,
Oh, did you get my text? You got my
right.
text?
No, do not bring it up. Oh, you never responded, and I saw two blue checks. Did you take
Yeah.
off your red?
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
bring it up. Like they got it, and they don't have. And again, if you just release the expectation of they need to acknowledge my text, no, they don't. You're not telling them for an acknowledgement. You're telling them so that they are not in any pain of like, why didn't you tell me? Or this is the first time I'm seeing it, and now I'm in shul, and I'm in so much pain, and now I have to go home to my family and cry because I'm being hit with this news that I wasn't expecting. I think then when you're with them, and you've told them already. And again, when they feel that they don't have the pressure that they have to say, oh, I got your text. And by the way, if they do say that because they feel uncomfortable that they didn't answer, you could say, we don't have to talk about it. I'm just so happy to see you. I think even saying that, giving that person permission to, we don't have to talk about it. Like, it's not about me, you know, that's like such a warm and loving and validating thing to do for that person to just be like, it's good. Like, you don't need to tell me. Like, you know, how's Yantif? What's up? I'm so happy to see you. And then just act like yourself. Make it about your friends and talking to them like a normal human being and not acting like they're a leper because they're single or they're married and not pregnant, or don't treat them differently. Treat them just like you would treat them if you were all in the same boat. I think that's really important.
And what about in general? Like in general, not Yontif, but a regular Shabbos. Families have, there are families with children. Like, is it ever appropriate for, I'm not talking about someone who's really close, but someone who's just a member of the community. We dive in the same shul. We see each other every Shabbos, every Kiddush. I've noticed that you don't have any children. Like, is it ever appropriate to go over for a woman to go over to a woman or a man to go over to a man and like open up a conversation? Is there anything I can do for you? Sometimes it could be, really coming from the warmest and like most wholesome and such an amazing place from their heart. And sometimes it could just be, I mean, I'm assuming it's always like that, but sometimes it could be perceived as such a difficult and hard, experience for the couple. Like, what would you say about the community? Because it's awkward for the community as well. Like, we want to help you, but we have no idea how. So like,
Right.
should we ever initiate? Should we wait for you to come to me? Because there are so many couples that, as you said before, they're not coming and waving the flag of infertility, or a single woman is not waving the flag of egg freezing. Oh, I need support. I need community support. Can anyone come over here and talk to me about it? How would you kind of speak to that really awkward relationship between couple or single and the community, and how can they support each other?
So that's where I say like things like this I feel like are more on the community to do. And that's why like schools and communities in general should have more open conversations about these things, because if it's something that we talk about in the shul and we bring in a speaker or we bring in an organization, we're opening up opportunities for someone then to come to the rabbi afterwards or the rebbitzin afterwards or someone that was at the event or the speaker of the event. We're opening up opportunities for them to say like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or you know what, I never even knew about egg freezing. I never knew anyone did it. Like I thought I was the only one that's doing it. Like, can I talk to you more about it? I think that's where we need to, I don't think it's really ever appropriate for anyone to go up to someone in shul or in public spaces and be like, hey, like I noticed you guys don't have kids and it's been a lot of years. Like, what's going on? Maybe there's some couples that never want to speak about it with anybody, and that's their prerogative. If they feel like they want to keep it private and they don't want the community to know or they don't want anyone to know, I don't think it's a kind thing to point it out to them. I think it could be embarrassing and it could be shameful and it could make them want to retreat even more. Like, oh, great, people look at us and think we're like nebuchs and that's all they're thinking. So I think, again, just treating them like normal and speaking to them about anything other than family and kids could be a great thing. But again, I do think that it's really on communities to try and make this more of a normal conversation, that it's actually less taboo, and I always say like, we always hear this like silence is golden. Infertility is actually like one of the few times where silence is golden is actually not the rule. It's like actually the complete opposite. Silence is actually so painful and it's so dangerous. So if we open up these conversations and we talk about it, at the sheer Shabbos afternoon, or from the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha, we bring it up. We talk about how there are people in this community that want to build families and they can't. It could be that person next to you or your sister. Be sensitive. There are singles who want to have families and can't find their bashert and are thinking it'll never happen for them. I think that this helps people to feel safer to, and then you go home and you're talking about it at the Shabbos table, maybe, and in a sensitive way, by the way. You're not like, could you believe what the rabbi said? You're saying like, wow, we really like, I never thought about this and this should be on our radar. And yes, people are suffering and struggling and you never know. Maybe you're creating like a safety for that person who's at your table, that they say, oh wow, like I really like how my sister is talking about what she heard. Like maybe she is a safe person to talk to. Like maybe she would respond properly and she wouldn't shame me for egg freezing. Maybe my mother would get it if I told her that we're struggling and we're in fertility treatments. Maybe she would listen and she wouldn't offer solutions. She would just be there for us. So I think thinking about that, how you talk about it at your Shabbos table, how you talk about it in your community, that does help people to open up when they're ready. And I think that's really what it is. We have to allow people to come to us. We shouldn't be approaching them, but we should
Yeah,
create opportunities for them to be able to approach us.
for sure. Someone asked on the chat, how do you respond? What would you say are a few tips? I mean, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what are a few tips for people to respond to they wrote older relatives or friends or even community members that inappropriately came over to that couple or inappropriately came over to that single and said, hey, by the way, I just heard about egg freezing. Is that something you're interested in? Or, hey, you've been married a bit more than 2 years. Is everything okay? I mean, how do you respond to those really disrespectful and offensive questions without should you fight back with obnoxious and disrespectful responses, or is there what do you find is most helpful, most an answer that would give you the satisfaction, of it was I responded in a mature and a proper way, and I hope they got the message that what they did was inappropriate.
Yeah. So I think that you have to think about in these situations, like, is it worth my energy? Meaning, is this person going to learn anything if I say anything right now? Like, is it worth my energy to tell them what they're saying is inappropriate and to make them feel uncomfortable or say it straight? Or should I just kind of steer the conversation elsewhere, deflect, walk away? Like, what should I do right now? If you feel like it's the kind of situation where you can say, like, that's like a really uncomfortable question to ask people, and just like, I'm not answering it, but just for the future, don't
Right.
go asking people that might be a good response. um it could be something that you just change the subject. You say, oh, egg freezing sounds really great. How did you find that thing the other week? Did you end up doing that thing? You could change the subject, or you can just pretend you didn't hear it. Sorry, what, it's so loud in here, and walk away. Like, you can choose what your response is. And again, I think sometimes people think, if I don't tell someone off, if I don't let them know that they're offensive, I'm letting people get away with bad behavior. And I actually think that actually gives you more control when you decide, like, I'm not going to entertain this. I'm not going to give my energy to telling this person off. I think it actually is a strong boundary that's protecting your peace. Like, we don't always have to teach people lessons. We don't always have to tell people they're wrong. Sometimes it's the better solution, the better thing for our mental health to just say, you know what? Like, I'm just going to let this person do their thing, and like, I don't have to say anything. I can just let it go. And I know, again, that's very hard, especially I think we live in an age where like the social media therapists are like, don't let people get away with saying things to you, and like, you always have to, and it's like, you don't always have to. Sometimes it's better just to let it go, and that's how you keep your peace, and that's how you maintain your power, and that's how you maintain your dignity, and that's how you maintain your sanity. We don't always have to correct people and tell them what they're doing is wrong. And we don't have to be the savior to everyone. Like, I want to make sure they don't say this to the next person again. Do you know for sure that they're going to hear you, that they're going to learn? And if not, and again, maybe you're not in the position to be that person. Maybe you don't have the kishkas for it now because you're going through so much. So it's okay to say, like, I just don't want to deal with this. And you're not weak or a loser or giving up on people. You're just exercising your boundaries.
Yeah, it's so important. So, so, so important. Let's shift the conversation for a minute. As we know, this is all very, very taxing. It's very
Yeah.
difficult. It's straining emotionally, physically. I mean, on so many different fronts. At what point do you think a couple, a woman, a man, whomever it may be, at what point should they be seeking mental health support? At what point, when does a person know that, like, okay, now is the time that I really need to speak to someone, and my sister is not the person. I really need to speak to a professional. I need to speak to a therapist who understands the cultural, the background, the halachic. There's so much here. Like, when does a person know that they have to make that jump or that switch, that transition to someone professional?
So I think when you're feeling like persistently overwhelmed, meaning it's not just like a rough patch, like it's this like persistent pattern of, I cannot shake this. I'm always upset. I'm always stressed. I am having a hard time like regulating my emotions. I can't function. I can't think about anything else. That's like a pretty good sign. When your like basics are disrupted, so your sleep is off, your eating is off, either you're not eating or you can't stop eating. You can't focus on simple tasks. Everything feels overwhelming, and you're not getting stuff done, and you feel maybe either paralyzed by things. And if your body is saying it, you're having aches and pains, your stomach is hurting, your head is pounding all the time, and not because of your medications, meaning it's not fertility treatment related. You feel like your body is really feeling your stress. Like, that's also a good indicator. Our bodies, they really communicate with us. They tell us, but your jaw is hurting, your TMJ is out of control, you have tension in your shoulders. Your body's telling you, I am having a hard time. I think if you feel a lot of anger and guilt, again, anger and guilt during this process is normal, but if it's to the point where you're constantly irritable, you're constantly blaming yourself, it's taking over, you're yelling, you're short with people, you're just mad all the time, and you feel like it's like this like feeling that's sitting in you all the time, that you're like, ugh, I hate who I am. I'm just mad. Like, I'm not happy for anyone ever, and I just, like, when someone tells me they're pregnant, I hate them. It's not just I'm sad and jealous, I just hate them. That's probably also like a pretty good sign. I think also feelings like a loss of joy, like you don't enjoy anything anymore. Everything feels pointless or flat. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to do things. You don't want to go places. Again, to some extent, sometimes that isolation, that like wanting to hide from the world, can make sense. But when it's persistent and it's always, and it's even when like you don't want to, meaning you're like, I know I should go, but I can't force myself, that could be like an indication like that depression might be settling in, and that it's starting to creep in and take over. And so that's when you definitely want to get help. And feeling stuck, right? Just feeling like, I can't get out of this funk. That's like a really good indicator that you probably want to get help.
Mhm. And let me ask you another question, because you also have a unique perspective as a frum woman who meets with many couples, not only Jewish, but many frum couples and frum patient base. Can you speak a little bit about the like that added layer of anxiety or stress or or discomfort when it comes to the halachic angle, when it comes to the fact that there's a Rav involved and I need to ask my Rav questions about this, and there's Shabbos and there's Nida, and there's like all these religious elements to my journey, which when I sit in the waiting room, I just think, if I wasn't Jewish, I wouldn't have to be worrying about this. I would, how does that play to the Orthodox couple that are going through a very difficult journey as is, and then there's the added component. So I'm from a Rav perspective, so the shilas are coming to my way, and I hear the shilas, and I deal with the shilas, and I try to help them, but I'm not the mental health professional. I'm not hearing them open up per se. Some do, but you're the one who they're opening up to, and kind of putting it all out. So from that perspective, can you shed a little bit of light to what the Orthodox patient is actually going through?
Yeah. So like I said, infertility like really messes with your sense of control. And sometimes halacha can feel like it's demanding even more when you have nothing left. That it's making things even more complicated to the point where sometimes people feel resentful, like you were saying, that they're like, if I wasn't religious, I wouldn't even have these problems. And it's really like a juggle. It's hard. And people often then feel guilt. Am I a bad Jew? And now I'm thinking these things, so like Hashem is going to be angry at me, and then it just like compounds all of the complicated feelings and the stress and the nerves of like I don't want to think the wrong thing because I don't want to feel like like God is going to punish me for this. I think that emotionally it's really about self-compassion. You're not a bad Jew for struggling. You're a real Jew for wrestling with it. Even the thought of like halacha feels like it's so complicated with all of this, and there's so many things that like I have to do on top of this, and it makes me feel resentful sometimes, but I'm still doing it, or I'm struggling with it even. Maybe you're not doing it, but you're struggling with it. I think even just acknowledging that it's a struggle for you shows like this is important to you. And I think that sometimes what's helpful is number one, I mean, the most important thing is for sure consulting with a compassionate Rav who is real and understands those spiritual struggles and will be non-judgmental and will, remind you like Hashem's not keeping score here. He's in it with you. Like he wants you to be successful, and he's not sitting up there going like, well, you're upset about Nida, so no baby for you this month. Like that is not the Hashem that we believe in. And we talk a lot about like vending machine Judaism. I don't know if any of you have heard that term, where it's like, well, if I do nishmat for 40 days, not that there's anything wrong with doing nishmat for 40 days, but if I do, I'm going to have a baby. And then you do nishmat and you don't have a baby. And then you say, well, maybe I didn't say it enough, or maybe I didn't have the proper kavanah at the mikvah, or maybe I wasn't good about needs, or, I think it's very hard. So picking one thing, letting it ground you, I think saying, I'm going to daven, like, and again, it doesn't have to be 3 times a day, mincha, shacharis. It could be like davening in any way that works for you. It could be tehillim. It could be just speaking to Hashem in your office, in your car, in your bedroom, wherever. Shabbos, connecting with Shabbos, just deciding like on Shabbos, I'm really just going to like lean in and focus on connecting with my spirit and really enjoying the fact that I am unplugged from everything and that I have to just be like connected to who I am as a Jew. It could be lighting Shabbos candles. It could be, deciding to make challah. That even in itself, the physical act of making challah, the sensory of like of kneading the dough and all that, it's actually very good for you, like on a psychological level, like that sensory experience of making dough. Um, I think also like sometimes when we go through these things, like people decide like already I'm having all these challenges with all the halachic demands of fertility treatments, of things I can't do, or timing, or this or that. So like on top of all that, I'm gonna like overload on mitzvot. I'm gonna take all these new things on myself and whatever it is. And I think well, sometimes that can be great for some people. For some people, it's what they need and what they want. For other people, it breeds a lot of resentment. And I think it's important to remember you can keep that spark alive without like frying your circuits. So really just finding what connects me, what grounds me. And I think sometimes really, I know for me, like connecting with a rabbi who understood what my struggle was spiritually was actually the most like validating and healing thing. Like just to hear like you're not a bad person for feeling those things. And even like I said, like that struggle, understanding like you're not a bad Jew for struggling. You're a good Jew for wrestling with it. Like that line I remember was so powerful to me. I was like, oh my God, like thank you so much for saying that. Like was a perspective I couldn't even think of because I was just so racked with guilt about my resentment and not wanting to do things and feeling like it's not fair. And then on top of that, I have to do this. And, so I think that's important. And I think also remembering, like, anchor yourself in the Torah's compassion. Remember that there are so many stories of infertility and struggle throughout the Torah where, we think of Rachel Imenu, like that's, the obvious one, and Hannah and her crying. And I always lean on this one. I always talk about Tehillim. Like, look at, if you read Tehillim, like David Hamelech, how, we go through all of the emotions with him, how, at one point he's like, Hashem, you abandoned me, and why do you hate me? And why is my life so terrible? And at another point, he's like, oh, I love you, and I feel so connected to you, and you're amazing. This is our relationship with Hashem. There are times where we feel connected and we feel grateful and we love him. And there are times when we don't understand him and we're angry at him and we feel like he abandoned us. And I think we have a book of Tehillim that tells us it's okay to feel all these things. So take what you need, take that Tehillim. And again, I know for me, that was very helpful to say Tehillim, to go to those prakim where I know David was like, why did you abandon me? Like, don't you care about me? It felt very healing for me to say those same words. So if you need to do that, it's okay to struggle as a halachic Jew. It's okay to struggle as a human. And I think just reminding yourself that, yes, it's normal to feel like there are certain things that make me feel like they're getting in the way or they're making things harder. And I'm allowed to express that, and it doesn't make me a bad person. Maybe it doesn't change the reality. Sometimes it can. Again, speaking with a halachic authority, sometimes we think things are set in stone and they're actually not. And I think that's why a halachic, guide is so important. But that struggle, again, it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a Jew. That's what we do. We struggle.
Yep. Such important perspectives and tips. I mean, that's really, that I think is so helpful for so many people. I want to just address one last question before we wrap it up tonight. And that is, to borrow a phrase that you mentioned, to put a spark in the relationship. You were talking about the relationship that we have with Hashem, but let's talk about the spark, the relationship between husband and wife. And especially when it comes to intimacy and their intimate life, it could just be, the infertility experience could just be such a difficult one. How can you give us a few tips, just especially going into Yontif, where you might not even be home, you're going to be in a guest room, you're going to be in your old bedroom when you were, younger, and there are people around. Like, how does a couple maintain their intimate spark away from home, amongst family, struggling with infertility? There are so many X's against them. There's so many difficulties and challenges and obstacles, but it's so important, on the other hand, to maintain that relationship, to maintain that love and that spark and that intimacy and that connection. If you could just speak to that for just a few minutes before we say goodnight.
Yeah. So I think communication is the most important thing. And I know that's like so cliche. That's all we hear, like communication, but that is the reality. Like, if you want to maintain the intimacy of your marriage, and when I say intimacy, I don't just mean physical intimacy. It doesn't just mean sexual. It means your emotional connection, your spiritual connection, your intellectual connection with your partner. You need to communicate, especially when stress is high. So check in with each other. Talk about what's going on. Okay, we're going to my parents for Yontif. Like, what are we doing? How are we navigating this? Like, what, like, how are we handling the challenges? What are we going to do that we share a super thin wall with, my sister or whatever? Like, we can't even talk. She's going to hear our conversations. Like, how are we navigating that? What are we doing? I think it's also important that when you talk about the things that stress you out, use I statements, not you. This is also a very common, like, marriage advice thing. Don't accuse, don't blame or escalate fights with blame. Like, whenever we go to your parents, you always. It's I feel. Own the emotions. For me, this is what it's like for me when we're there. I feel alone when we don't talk, is a much better thing to say than you don't care how I feel. You just said we're going to go to your parents without even talking about me, right? You could say, like, I really wish that we would have talked about this more. I want to be included in these decisions. I want this to be a decision we make together. Changing how you talk about things. Share responsibility together also. Resentment can build when one partner feels like this is like they're stuck handling everything and like you're checked out mentally. So make sure that you guys are talking about the challenges that you are going to be experiencing in this process. so that you're like on the same page together. And I always say like the best mentality to have through any struggle in a marriage is it is you and me versus the problem. It's not you versus me. So it is you and me versus how are we handling Yantif with your family? It is you and me versus this infertility issue. It is you and me versus this pregnancy loss we just had. It's not you versus me. It's not I'm crying and devastated and you don't seem to care. Or I told you we can't go to your parents because I have to do my shots and we have to make sure we have that timed intercourse and you don't even think about it. We have to figure out how to navigate this together. It's a challenge that we are in together. We're not alone in this, right? Remember, like we have this shared goal. um, I think it's important to validate each other's feelings too, right? Like optimism isn't better than caution. So if you have one partner who's like, it's going to be fine, like we're good, we're going to figure it out. And you're like, no, it's going to be terrible. I don't think one is better than the other. They're both valid responses to this uncertainty and to challenge. And I think that if you can both acknowledge that there's an element of each of your responses that's right, then sometimes that helps, it stop feeling like a fight. So, you can try to find the good in each, in the other one's response of like, I love that you're so optimistic. Like it is a good attitude to have, but I also want to think about like, where might it be challenging for us? Like we do need to be a little bit realistic. And I think that like it's important to realize that optimism is such a good character trait. It can lift your spirits, but also being like a little bit of a cynic is not such a bad thing, right? And as a cynic myself, right? They say that cynics are actually like more grounded in reality. They have more critical thinking skills. So if you're the cynical one and you're like, yeah, but how are we going to make this work? Like, don't say I'm being negative. I'm just being realistic here. And I want to be optimistic. I want to cling to your like, we're going to figure it out. It's going to be great. But can you just like humor me and like help me figure out like, what are we doing? How am I going to the mikvah like on Seder night with your whole family there? What are we doing? Right? Like what's the story we're telling? So just make sure you're communicating that. And I think again, like acknowledging those different coping styles is very good. It's fine. We don't have to be on the same page in sync emotionally all the time of how we're dealing with this, but we do have to be on the same page of like, we're going to let each other feel what the other one needs to feel without judging, without, name calling, without you bring me down all the time. You're so negative or you're so delusional or you don't care. I think that's really important. Like, don't make your partner, if feel what you're feeling. They don't have to react the same way that you do. But again, trying just to communicate and try to get in sync with each other as much as possible, and being curious about what the other person is saying versus arguing, about like what you want. I think is the most important thing, to try to hear what your partner's saying, to try to understand it versus like, arguing your side in court. I always say like marriages, it's not a courtroom. Like there's not like a right and a wrong. There could be two people that are right here. And we have to figure out how do we bridge that gap of like two people who have two very valid points of view. And we need to figure out how to like make room for each of those people to feel, even if we're not going with both options, because we can't, but for each person to feel like their needs and their voice was heard. And it's not easy, it's complicated.
Yeah. Wow. Rachel, this was incredibly educational, informative, and so inspiring just to hear you speak, to hear you talk about so many important issues that so many of us are going through, are experiencing, are living through, and may frankly be dreading Yontif. But I do believe that a lot of these tips and a lot of these perspectives will help many, many people navigate the obstacles and navigate Yontif and navigate family and navigate friends. And it really is an amazing, amazing zchus for us here at PUA to host you on this webinar. We wish you great luck with your family and your clients, and we wish everyone who's listening a Chag kosher v'sameach. It should be a Yontif with simcha. You should be able to find and tap into that happiness, despite the fact that we're going through everything and with everything. But we know that we're here for you. There are so many professionals that are here for you. PUA is here for you. Please feel free to reach out, and we will be able to support you in any way that we can. Thank you very much, Rachel. Have a great night to everyone, and good Yontif. Take care.
Thank you.